I want to ask you something. How do you go from this to this? How does a group of warring villages become this? And how do you pick a king from amongst them? What if I told you that this could have happened in only 180 years? But what if I told you it would take thousands of years before they got here? Well, you're going to want to stick around because we're talking about the first dynasty of Egypt. So let's get back to my original question. How do you go from this to this? Well, around 3150 BCE, on the banks of the eternal Nile, a transformation was taking place. Two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, were unified under a single crown, and the man behind this unification was a warrior king named Narmer, or as legend calls him, Menes. And yes, believe it or not, we are just getting started. But in order to understand this transition, we need to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. We've said this before, but we'll say it again. Egypt is special. While most civilizations rose out of fertile river valleys, Egypt's geography was truly unique. On one side, you had the limitless riches of the Sahara Desert. On the other, you had the unpredictable floods of the Mediterranean Sea. The only thing between these two opposing forces was the Nile River, which flooded predictably every year, providing fresh nutrients for farming, creating a blessing and a curse. If the river flooded too much, the soil would be washed away. If it didn't flood enough, there wouldn't be any nutrients deposited. You can imagine that living in this environment required very smart and careful management. In fact, without the yearly flooding of the Nile, Egypt probably wouldn't have been settled to begin with. So while you can imagine that most people in this period were focused primarily on agriculture, there was still room for those that excelled in things like art and innovation to carve out a space for themselves within society. And in time, a small village along the Nile might have grown to become the next big city. This is how we ended up with places like Heliopolis, Memphis, and Thebes. Each city had its own petty ruler, and life was generally peaceful until someone came along who thought it would be a great idea to unite everything under their rule. That's right, you guessed it. It was Narmer. And to understand Narmer, we need to talk about the Narmer palette. The Narmer palette is a piece of stone carved over 5,000 years ago. It shows Narmer wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, striking down his enemies. Some scholars argue that the scene depicted is actually a procession rather than a battle. But either way, it symbolizes a unification of two lands under one ruler. The Narmer palette is our oldest piece of evidence showing the unification of Egypt. It was discovered at a site called Hierakonpolis, which means the place of the hawk's mace. This site was likely a strategic stronghold during Narmer's campaign to unify Egypt. As we continue to uncover more and more about Narmer, we find ourselves becoming more and more convinced that the legends about him might be true. Recent excavations have uncovered a palettes complex near where the Narmer palette was found, which may have belonged to him, and an inscription found at the site lists a large number of his royal titles. So, who exactly was Narmer? The answer is complicated. What we do know is that he united Upper and Lower Egypt. We also know that he had a royal title, meaning that he was a great of praises, meaning that he was basically the head guy. It's likely that Narmer inherited the title of king from his father, who was a petty ruler of Upper Egypt. Narmer himself would then pass his throne down to his son, Horahah, who would be considered the founder of the first dynasty. We do not know much about Narmer, except for what we can gather from the title list at Hierakonpolis in the Narmer palette. The most popular theory amongst historians is that the Narmer palette is some kind of propaganda that serves to deify Narmer. However, there's another school of thought that believes that it may depict a real battle, and therefore, that Narmer may have been a conqueror. Personally, we think it's likely that Narmer may have started as a local chief, but eventually became a conqueror through circumstances beyond his control. The title given to him by some Egyptologists, namely Toby Wilkinson, is King of Upper and Lower Egypt, but there doesn't seem to be any solid evidence to support that claim. For now, we will simply call him King of Upper Egypt. Whatever the case may be, Narmer is an enigmatic figure and the first king of a new era for Egypt. So now we ask, what did his successors do? Well, after Narmer came Horahah, who further consolidated the kingdom, extending its reach into Nubia. Aha was a warrior king. Under his rule, Egypt invaded Nubia, bringing back gold and other resources. The borders of Egypt would never shrink from this point forward. Soon after him, Ja took the throne, who reigned powerfully for over 70 years. George's tomb at Abydos tells a chilling story. Hundreds of retainers and animals were sacrificed to serve him in the afterlife, but his reign wasn't all doom and gloom. During his time, many cities and sanctuaries were founded, including the sacred animal preserve of Yuban. Scholars estimate that his kingdom stretched as far south as modern-day Sudan. After Jur died, his son, Jed, took over and ruled peacefully. But it's his wife, Queen Merneth, that has captured the attention of Egypt. Merneth is believed by some to be the first female pharaoh of Egypt. She ruled alongside Jed after he suffered an injury to his right eye. Merneth's own name literally translates to powerful woman. Her stepson, Den, would eventually take the throne after Jet died. and Den became one of the greatest rulers of the first dynasty. Not only did he wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing complete unity, but he also celebrated one of the earliest said jubilees, a royal renewal festival that lasted decades. This celebration of the king's power helped to promote stability throughout the kingdom. With Den's passing, the first dynasty continued with kings like Anaj, Semerkit, and finally Sahay. Each king contributed to the growing state and helped to cement the role of pharaoh. They began to formalize the rituals, symbols, and titles that would define pharaonic rule for millennia. The first dynasty was formally concluded when Kea passed away, leaving behind a large estate at Abydos. His successor would technically belong to the second dynasty, but there was a gap of about 150 years in between. So why did the dynasty end? The answer is pretty simple. The dynasty ended because Egypt needed a new direction. At this point, Egypt had existed as a unified nation for about 200 years. The old petty kings had been replaced by one powerful ruler, the pharaoh. Now the newly established government needed to address new challenges, such as maintaining a stable food supply, issuing laws, and expanding trade routes. By the end of the first dynasty, the groundwork had been laid for a golden age of peace and prosperity. But that would have to wait for the next dynasty. The first dynasty wasn't just about war and politics. It was the dawn of Egyptian civilization itself. Hieroglyphic writing flourished. Bureaucracy took form. Artisans crafted ceremonial palettes, jewelry, and pottery of astonishing beauty. Shipbuilders launched long wooden boats down the Nile, connecting Egypt with the Levant. The first dynasty saw the development of a number of iconic structures, including the mastaba, a type of Egyptian tomb, as well as the beginnings of the Great Pyramid. During this time, the Egyptians developed their religion, which revolved around a number of gods and goddesses. Some of the most popular deities of the time included Horus, the sky god, and Osiris, the god of the underworld. The Egyptians worshipped these gods through rituals and ceremonies, which were often held in temples. One of the most important religious sites of the time was the necropolis of Abydos, which served as the burial ground for many of Egypt's early kings. The cult of Osiris, which venerated the god of the underworld, also flourished during the first dynasty. The cult's main center was at Abydos, where the first kings of Egypt were believed to be buried. The first dynasty was not just the beginning of pharaohs, it was the birth of a civilization that gave the world pyramids, gods, language, and legacy. It all began here with Narmer, and a single, powerful idea that order could rise from chaos under the rule of a god. The first dynasty of Egypt was a time of great change and upheaval, but it was also a time of great accomplishment. The kings of this dynasty laid the foundation for a civilization that would last for thousands of years. We hope you enjoyed learning about the first dynasty of Egypt. If you did, please consider subscribing and joining us on our journey to uncover the secrets of the ancient world. Thank you for watching.